Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Unlocked, the Ricky Lock podcast, the podcast to help inspire success in your business and to help you live the best version of your life. And we are recording this episode live at Field Trip.
Yay!
Brilliant. That went as best as it could. Thank you very much for doing that. Thank you. So joining me today for a discussion on peak performance is two amazing guests, Chris Mooney and Steph Jeavons. Now, Chris is a mindset and resilience facilitator and coach from Chris Mooney Learning, who helps people to switch off their autopilot responses and develop their resilience for life's challenges at home and at work. And my other guest is Steph Jeavons, who is the first Brit to circumnavigate the globe and travel across all 7 continents on a motorcycle. Lovely to see you both. How are you?
Hi.
Good.
Really good. Thank you.
Good. Sun is shining in Bournemouth.
Oh, brilliant. It's a beautiful day to record a live podcast then. Well, thank you for joining us and really looking forward to this conversation. There are people that are live in this audience as well. So as I said, if you have any questions, please let Jon know and then we'll field those as we go later on. But before we start, I think it's really important to just make a big thank you to both Sarah and Jon from obviously Field Trip for hosting this wonderful opportunity. So my thanks to both you two. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. So I think we should have a little chat about peak performance. And Steph, traveling around the world is not a simple task, I would say, and especially on a motorcycle as well. So I'm going to ask a generic question to you. What does peak performance mean to you?
Well, to me, I guess it means being the best you can, performing to the best of your abilities. And that is only gauged by yourself, I guess, not against anybody else, but how you feel within yourself, and just being as positive as you can.
Brilliant. And just as a bit of a backstory, obviously this wasn't just a thing that happened overnight. This was a long thing that was prepared for to create this adventure, and I believe it was over, was it 4 years?
Yeah, the journey itself was 4 years. The planning was even longer, and the seed was planted even longer ago, about 20 years before that. But the trip itself took 4 years. It was intended to be 18 months, although I kind of hoped it would take longer. That to me was a success. It meant that I was doing okay and finding ways to overcome things. So yeah.
And how does anybody choose to just decide that I want to go travel around the world? How did you get into that mindset, or what was the seed, as you said, 20 years ago that planted that?
Well, I wasn't in such a great place it was actually 25 years ago now. I stopped counting a long time ago, but I was young and I was quite foolish, and I was in a bad place in my life mentally. Just not, things weren't particularly going well for me. I was heavily involved in drugs. I got myself into a lot of trouble and I ended up in prison. And from that, I could have gone one of two ways, and I very nearly went the other way. But thankfully, I took that as a springboard, I suppose, to change my life and my mindset, and pretty much everything about my life and my outlook particularly. And I made the decision that this was going to be where I came back and where I started, because I lost a lot of my life, not only from drugs, but also from the prison sentence itself. It gives you time to think, that's for sure. And I'm not sure I would change it, although, that's quite a strong thing to say. But I think it certainly, I found myself in that dark time. And that really gave me some drive and some motivation, I suppose, to go forward. And I made the decision that I wanted to see more of the world. I wanted to make something of myself, and I had something to prove to myself, I guess. So I literally wrote a to-do list that said, get off drugs, get out of prison, travel the world. And and in that order, and that's what I did. It took me a while. I did a lot of travel in that 20 years, but then I always had this big itch that needed scratching, and I wanted to do a big journey, something that was really kind of I had a few smaller goals in between. Like I wanted to go and see the orangutans. I wanted to see a baobab tree, and I thought, I'm going to go just travel, see the orangutans. And then eventually it became, I'm going to travel all 7 continents on a motorbike. Why not,
Yeah, absolutely. And what motorbike was it as well?
It was a Honda CRF 250L. So not what at the time people would have potentially thought was a great bike to travel long distance travel. More and more people are doing that now. They're going for smaller bikes. It's not such a big deal anymore. Whereas it kind of was at the time. People said I was crazy. I wouldn't make it. The bike wouldn't make it. There was quite a lot of negativity and a lot of positivity as well. But you know, I had to overcome quite a lot of negative comments and of course, you know, that they fuel you as well after a while. But yeah, the 250 was actually turned out to be a great bike for the journey.
Brilliant. Yeah. And I think you said it really well there about those comments and negative views. It kind of builds into that resilience of even making the decision to go ahead. But then one of the things that you did was that you were solo, wasn't you? It wasn't that you were doing this with a team. This was purely a solo adventure. Now, one of the things that I'm really interested in terms of hitting peak performance is mindset. We talk about this a lot in the podcast, and for a lot of people listening, it's all about how to create that success. But how do you even have that mindset? What fuels that mindset for you to say, I'm going to go and achieve this wonderful thing, which isn't just a simple task. It's a fantastic achievement, and congratulations to you. But what fuels that mindset to achieve that?
Well, you know, I think doing it on my own was important, because I think it's very easy if you're doing it with somebody else. I mean, nobody's going to go with me anyway, right? It was crazy enough to go with me, but but I think that I had to do it on my own because it was my personal selfish thing. I had to be selfish. I wanted to achieve something. It was a personal goal, and I don't know. I think it was always just, you know, like I said, that the hard times kind of fueled me moving forward, and that drive and ambition, because I had a goal to go out there and do something, and come hell or high water, I was determined to do it and find a way to do it. So yeah.
Oh, brilliant. I think it's a really important thing to understand, especially with, you know, the whole resilience and making tough decisions, because I guess when you're faced on your own around the world, you've got no crew, you've got no support, you are literally against the odds. And I know that for anybody watching, if you go check out some of the videos from Steph, you'll see lots of amazing videos. You also did another trek with some ladies on some bikes to, was it the Himalayas?
The Everest Base Camp in Tibet. Yeah.
and there's a great example in that video where I think one of the riders falls off. I think they might have broken their ankle, or suspectedly broken their ankle. You're up against the odds. It's terrible terrain. How do you make those decisions to carry on and achieve that peak performance where, like we were talking earlier on in an earlier session today with Jon about a false summit, how do you progress forward through that when you are completely up against the odds?
Well, that was totally different experience, because it was working as a team, and you've got to have a different mindset there again. But and I didn't feel like I led those women. I felt like I worked with those women, and you've really got to find your sense of humor in those times, because we had landslides, we had the worst conditions possible, absolutely, you know, the worst that they could have been. The rain was historically bad, and the mud was just like a quagmire. And we had a long way to go, plus altitude, plus, as you said, we had a broken ankle. We had a couple of injuries in the end, and waterfalls to get through as well, which was quite interesting. We had one girl I called her Karen Waterboard Anderson after that, because she got stuck under the waterfall, but she kept going. It was cold. We were breathing extremely heavily because of the altitude, and people were really fighting all the elements. And we kept going, working as a team. And I think the sense of humor is the most important thing there. We were all physically tired, and it could have been, it would have been so easy to start sort of getting angry with each other and to start really getting irritable. But everybody worked together from this, you know, on the same mindset we were going to get through this. I don't think anybody actually, I've certainly, in all my tough times, I don't think I've ever considered stopping as an option. Although you do have to reassess and ask yourself, is this still important to me? I think that's important. If you just carry on regardless, then you know sometimes you miss the point that, okay, well, this isn't for me. But there's nothing wrong with saying this isn't for me. That's not failure. But I think just reassessing and going, yeah, no, this is important, and I am going to carry on. And when you're physically tired and mentally tired, you know, you just let brute force and ignorance take over. That's my key weapon. Brute force and ignorance works every time.
Absolutely, yeah. And I guess when you're on your own as well, you've got that inner voice, haven't you, talking to you, and you've got to separate between the logical and the, the rational and the emotional part of that brain to, hear the right things you want to hear, to, like you said, just carrying on. And I guess for Chris, in your line of work as a resilience coach, you may face loads of decisions like that as well, such as, the mindset to progress through and hit that peak performance. But a lot of this comes obviously from the brain. We talked about this, how Steph had this wonderful mindset. What do you experience when you talk to people in your line of work around peak performance about mindset?
Yeah. Well, it's like, oh man, how do I follow that? It's like I don't even ride a bicycle. Like, I got a massive scar on my head when I fell off a bicycle. So fair dues stuff. I think there's so much interesting stuff going on there with our brain, and in fact, it's something I'm going to talk about more in my 2:00 session on the field trip today, because it does so much to try and keep us safe while at the same time tripping us up at this, have you ever had one of those times, for example, where you just replay your biggest fail on loop in your head again and again and again, and our brain has this habit of telling us that we're not good enough, that we're going to fail, and it's all for good reason, because it's trying to protect us and keep us alive and keep us safe and going. I think one of the really important things is to acknowledge that is an illogical voice in our head. It's not based in reality. So I think once we start to get better at switching off that autopilot and actually recognizing it for what it is, it's irrational, we can then start to do something about it and bring in our logical part of our brain to manage that, whether it's that inner critic or whether it's that imposter syndrome.
Definitely, yeah. It plays a massive part into it, doesn't it? And I think especially the current circumstances that we're in now, if nobody has realized, we're in a global pandemic, and it's quite crazy in the world right now, especially over America, but we won't dwell onto that one. But Chris, obviously in your line of work with the teams and the businesses that you work with, what are the things that you kind of see, like responses from people about trying to get through that right now, especially with the circumstances playing into that and adding that extra layer of, Sarah says, mental toughness and resilience? What do you see there in that line of work?
I think what Steph was talking about earlier is so important. I see the people who are, let's call them, really keeping strong and actively developing their resilience. I see them reflecting on their story. So of everything that Steph talked about her story and what's led her to where she is, we've all got our own story. And I think that for me is so important, to take stock of where does our resilience come from, because of course we all have different levels of it. And not just that, we have different levels at different points, depending on what we're faced with. So I think that's the starting point. And I work with a lot of people who, let's say, don't actively manage or develop their own resilience or their own mindset in any particular way. Not just now, but like you say, our first pandemic is that it becomes really telling who does and who doesn't, and how it can how it can help and support us. And so some of the stuff I see people resort to that we've all done in our lives is that I work with lots of people who tell me that they can't change, or that they haven't got what it takes, and I think that there can be some quite unhealthy coping mechanisms that we develop when we are in that mindset, because that can look on a scale of seriousness from sticking our head in the sand or not asking for help, trying to stay strong for everyone around us, going on from it, and that gets us through a little bit, but not in the long term. And then I think some people say, well, yeah, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, or they say I haven't got time for that mindset stuff because that's all soft skills, or fluffy. That's the word they use. That's all fluffy. And then something like this hits, they, okay, who's fluffy now? It's like, how resilient are you feeling on a scale of 1 to 10?
Yes, I can certainly echo that. When I was in my behavioral training role back in Argos, where I'd walk into a room and it'd be like, oh, right, here comes the fluffy guys to do this. Well, actually, no. Yeah, as you said now, look, he's laughing now. Anyway, great response there, both Chris and Steph there. So thank you for that. I think we'll, at this point, just stop for a second to head over to Jon. Jon, have we got any questions for both Chris and Steph, or me?
Nobody's put a specific question into me yet. I think that's because people have been really, I think, taken by the stories. I guess something that I'd quite like to know is, from Steph, what would you do differently if you had the same trip again? I know it was kind of forced by different circumstances and things, but if someone said to you, okay, you can go around the world again, what's the kind of the one thing you would change about it?
Well, I think I would probably, I don't know, it's a tough one, because I felt like the thing that got me round was having the goal and the end mission, but the thing that also was a detriment at times was the goal and the end mission. So I was constantly like, I've got to keep going because of this. So no matter how bad it gets, I kept focused on that end goal. But sometimes it also stopped me from slowing down when I should have done, or taking my time, or enjoying. And I did that to a point. But so what I would love to do is to do it again, but kind of without that end goal. And that would be a completely different journey. But the first trip had to be like that. And I do work well to goals. I do like to have a mission and a challenge, but I'd also like to learn to just, take my time. I even find that when I'm walking in the woods, I like to have something to do as I'm walking in the woods. I walk fast. I tend to, and I'm telling myself now to slow down and take my time and stop and literally smell the flowers, So I'd like to be able to do it again without a sort of a mission only, but just to go out and enjoy myself and see if I could do it. I'm not sure I could.
Probably have to wait a while with the current circumstances.
Yeah, but I tell you what I did really relate to was Chris saying about the imposter complex. Now that I'd never heard of before. And I remember leaving on my first day going, any minute now, people are going to realize I haven't got a clue what I'm doing. And, they're going to see me for the imposter that I am. And I didn't know that was a thing. I thought that was just in my head. And I wish that somebody told me that before. And actually, people weren't looking at me thinking that I knew what I was doing. They were supporting me because I was giving it a go, And yeah, I wish I'd have known that sooner.
Yeah, it's a real thing. And what I love, Steph, is that so many more of us are starting to talk about it now, and it's become a recognized thing. But isn't that interesting? Like, because I remember not that long ago, even going back a few years, nobody was talking about it. A bit like mental health, that taboo, and suddenly people start to open up and they go, "Oh wow, what, you get that as well? I thought that was just me. Thought was going to be discovered as a fraud." Yeah. And it's all that inner voice is going, no, you don't want to do that, because if you do that, you'll fail. And if you fail, you'll look stupid. And if you look stupid, and on it goes. Yeah, it's fascinating.
And yet we are all so similar, and it's also relatable. It's just bizarre that we weren't sharing that sooner.
Yeah.
Great answers. Thank you, guys. We're going to hand over to Mark. Mark, you've got a question for Steph and for Chris.
Yeah, I've got two questions, one for each. I'll go with Steph first. So Steph, during your trip, what was your lowest point, or any time that you kind of second guessed yourself as to whether you'd be able to complete the trip? And how did you kind of snap yourself out of that mindset and change? And then Chris, for you, as we kind of head in England into a new COVID lockdown, what are your kind of top tips to prepare our kind of mental mindsets to maintain top performance throughout lockdown?
Well, Steph, do you want to go first?
Okay, well, the two actually spring to mind, and I'm going to choose one. And I guess it was when I was in North America. I had a lot of injuries, so I was suffering from chronic pain by then. I had a frozen shoulder, so I couldn't move my arm beyond the handlebars. Couldn't raise it up. I had back pain. I was suffering from pain anxiety and all sorts of things. Somebody coughed next to me and I'd be jumpy, and it was quite a bizarre thing. And I had to question why I was doing it and whether I should carry on at that point. And again, the decision, what came back was, yes, it was still important, but I had to reassess and change things slightly. So I had to be good to myself. I was beating myself up for such a long time and fighting through the pain. I had to be strong, had to be tough. And actually, the best thing I needed to do, the best thing I could do was actually just be kind to myself and just be gentle and remember that I'm not a machine. And so I took time out. I mean, I had no choice in the end, really, but I took time out when I was in Canada. And I got treatment. I ended up in A&E. And then I decided to just change my plan, but not go home. So it was a case of, actually, no, I did go home, but not finish. So I decided to go home for a few weeks, see my dog, see my family. People were then telling me, you've got to stop, you've done enough. And I'm like, no, I haven't done enough, but I promise I'll be kinder to myself. And then a few weeks later, I said to myself, by the time I could walk up a mountain, because I live right at the foot of Snowdon, by the time I can climb a mountain, I'm back on the bike again. I'm flying back. And it was a few weeks, and I climbed a mountain. Right, I'm going. And everyone said, you need more time. And I was like, no, I don't. I'm good. And like a child who's promised that, I promise I'll be good if if the dog gets better or whatever. Then those promises went out the window, and I was straight back on the bike way sooner than I should have been. But I learned a few things, and that was to just slow it down and be a bit kinder to my body. So yeah, it was just a case of reassessing at that stage.
I think it's an important message, isn't it, right now, to slow down and be kind to your body, because I think you can risk that damage, can't you, of going into burnout or into a meltdown. I certainly felt that this year, where I thought, well, I can now got the time now to just progress and hit all these things I wanted to hit. But in the long run, it didn't actually pay off. And I should have just stopped, slowed down, reflected, been grateful for what I had, and just be kind to myself, because you're just pushing yourself to the edge, aren't you? But yeah, great question. Great answer there. Thank you, Steph. And Chris, your question, if you can remember your question from Mark.
Yes, I can. It was about top tips for the new lockdown, wasn't it? Yeah, it's like a bit like a COVID briefing, isn't it, with the questions? So I made a little note of it, Mark. Thank you. So yeah, I should probably frame these in the fact that, yeah, I'm going to hit you with my few top tips. They all sit in this place of doing something tangible to help your resilience, rather than that cheesy old, keep your chin up or hope for the best or that kind of stuff. Because at a time like this, I don't feel that that's particularly helpful. It holds a little bit of sway. And then, of course, some people, particularly UK and elsewhere, they're going straight from local lockdowns into another full month of national lockdown. So the first tip being keep perspective. And we talk about this a lot, don't we? But it's in the moment of a huge change, it's so easy to forget that perspective. And I think what I mean by that is go with the ebb and the flow. So take advantage of the good days and maximize the good days, and don't beat yourself up for the bad days, because we'll have all had many of those this year. And we have a habit, again, of trying to stay strong and so on. So we try and force ourselves out of them, or force ourselves to feel better. And we can't rush these things. So I think keep that perspective, recognize that things will get better. This is a really tough year. There have been tough years before, and there will be tough years again. And so just keep that perspective. The second one being something that we touched on earlier, really, that element of focusing on what you can control or influence. And just to add a little bit of context to that, I think that we spend so much time either living in the past or worrying about the future, that we focus so much on what might happen or what if. And don't get me wrong, again, just a quick caveat, there is a lot of stuff going wrong at the minute. We're talking big stuff like personal, professional, bereavement. There's some big stuff going on, but it's trying to stay focused on the stuff that in all likelihood may well never happen. And if it does, it's about developing those resilience reserves so that you've got them there for when you need them. And then the final quick one is just to be kind. Be kind to yourself, be kind to others, support each other, and do what you can to support yourself. So what I mean, again, is that we see so many people coming out of the woodwork, and I'm cautious to lump Steph and I in with this crowd, but you get these kind of so-called experts coming out at a time like this, and they say, oh, well, isn't this a brilliant opportunity, but like Ricky's just mentioned, to write that book that you've always been wanting to write, or to Marie Kondo your whole house, or to, I don't know what it might be. There is no requirement to do that during these times. Sometimes just getting up and having the resilience to get through the day and to make it out the other end is more than enough. So just be kind.
It's a great answer, Chris. The first point you mentioned reminds me of a phrase that's in this book, if anyone's read it, The Art of Being Brilliant. And he talks about how it's okay to have a bad day. It's not okay to have a bad life. You know, there will be periods probably where you might have those wallow days, as they mentioned in sumo, the hippo time, but it's not okay to have a bad life. You know, like you said, could be worse, couldn't it? There could be so much more worse things going on. And I remember talking to Sarah and both Bev, who are listening in the audience right now, is that the things around us as well that we can be grateful for. You know, I'm very grateful for, you know, being here. I've got a lovely warm room. I've got food on the table. It could be far worse. And there are people out there in very terrible, you know, circumstances. So if you are going to have those bad days, that's okay. Just remember that, you know, it's not okay to have a bad life. Be kind, spread some magic, spread some kindness, people. Right. Okay. Katia, you have a lovely question as well. So Katia, over to you, please.
Hi, thank you. Hi, this is Katia. This is a question for Steph. So Steph, you mentioned that when you were on your travels, you felt like you were an imposter before you even knew the concept of the imposter syndrome. So my question to you, Steph, is what helped you realize that you weren't an imposter and you were doing your thing and you were good at it?
Well, I had 4 years to think about it. So, you know, I had what I call my helmet time, which is just time on my own in my helmet. And it is a good time to reflect. And it's kind of like my meditation. And I realized that you don't need to be an expert and you learn as you go. And actually, I was doing it. So therefore, you know, I'm not an imposter. And I think as I hit those little goals, I mean, when I left, I said, I'm going to ride on all 7 continents. And I had absolutely no idea how I was going to achieve that. I didn't have the answers to everything. I was no good at mechanics. I had only Welsh and English under my belt for languages. I didn't have any martial arts experience. I'm not particularly even a good rider, even to this day. You know, I'm not a great rider. I have no special skills, but I got through it, and therefore I'm not an imposter. You know, and I think that the problem is you don't need to know everything and have all the answers before you leave to give it a go and to just go for it, as long as you're giving it your all. And you know, I still have days where I think, oh, you know, I walk into a room full of expert people, and I think I shouldn't be on this panel, or I shouldn't be here. And then I think, oh, well, why not? You know, why shouldn't I be? I've got, you know, what I have to say is, you know, hopefully useful to somebody or beneficial to somebody. And I get feedback occasionally from people saying, thank you so much for that. That inspired me to do something, or that, you know, encouraged me to whatever. And that reassures me that, you know, that, you know, what I have to offer is valid, I suppose. But overcoming it in the first place is the difficult bit. Once you get going, you get all that positive reinforcement. You go, yay, look, I did it. I made it to Antarctica. Ooh, what's the next goal? You know, and then that makes you feel. When I got to Antarctica, so many people said, for that one example, so many people said to me, you won't be able to make it. It's not possible. So many people have tried before you. And when I got there and landed, that was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. I sat there quietly, and I had what Chris was saying about putting the past and the future behind you. I was literally in that moment. I couldn't have been more in that moment. And a little penguin came onto the shore and sort of looked at me, and I looked back at him and I said hello. And I thought, he'll have forgotten about me in 2 minutes time. You know, he's gone, and I've got no consequence to him. And that's such a lovely mindset that animals have, is that living in that moment. And I thought, I can do anything now. I've learned, you know, I've learned how to live, you know, to root myself in that moment. And people said I couldn't do it, and I did it. And therefore that gave me the strength to carry on and to try more things and keep going.
I love that. Great question there, Katia, and a great answer there as well, Steph. I love that, living in the moment. That's a lovely phrase that we should probably take away right now. And I also am quite impressed that you said about martial arts in there. So I was prepared, like, oh my God, what was you going to face on that trip? But there's something that rings to bell here, which is forgive me, I can't remember the surname, but if you've ever seen Catch Me If You Can, Frank, if anybody can tell me what his surname is, then that'd be great. But the guy who was in the Catch Me If You Can, in the true story, when he was caught by the FBI, you know, he never claimed to be an expert in any of it. If you've not seen the film, for anyone that's listening right now, he was a pilot, a doctor, loads of different things that he did. And when he was caught by the FBI, all he said to the FBI was, when they said, "How did you do that?" Thank you, John. Frank Abagnale. He just said, "I was just one chapter ahead of everybody else." He wasn't an expert at all. He was just one step ahead, you know, one chapter ahead. And I think that really rings to light there, you know, what you said there about Steph, that you don't have to be an expert in these things, you know. Right. Okay. Well, look, before we kind of start to wrap up near the end, there's one question I'd like to ask you both, and that is about habits. And I'd like to find out about what habits are required to achieve peak performance. Now, when we think of peak performance, we often associate it in the sporting world with sports psychology and things like that. But I'm really interested to hear both of your habits, both Steph and Chris, when you're achieving peak performance. So Steph, when it's around the world, or Chris, in your work, what are the habits that help you achieve peak performance?
Chris, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I have to. I was just thinking, should we start talking about how we all wake up at 5 a.m. and hustle stuff and smash it. And yeah, in terms of habits, I think lots of us, particularly at the minute, we might have that flexibility about how and when we get the work stuff done right now. And that has a new challenge, doesn't it, where it requires that discipline to create the habit. But for me, it's about learning. What I try and do is kind of learn I know myself well enough now where I know my flow, if that makes sense. So I work really hard not to create something that's going to go against what fits me naturally. In terms of my habits, I have a strong belief, as well as all the great chat we've had on imposter syndrome and all along those lines, and mindset. I think for anyone else in the audience who can relate to this, it can be a really lonely world when you're working on your own, when you are on your own. And I think that needs that element of strong mindset to have confidence in yourself, and to recognize your wins, like Steph was talking about, you know, to really take stock of them. And there's nothing wrong with that. And then another habit that springs out for me is that, even again, maybe more relevant at the minute, on those days where we just don't feel like we have what it takes, I really try and force myself to show up. So show up for my clients, show up for my business, show up for my friends and family, whoever it might be. And kind of just try and put myself out there still, because it just helps me to feel a little bit more like I'm performing at a better level, rather than, yeah, we've covered, you know, you need those slump days and you need to hide on the sofa with a duvet and Netflix and all that kind of stuff that's needed. But I still try and kind of put myself out there in terms of habits.
Thank you, Chris.
I'm pretty similar, actually. I'm a bit of a to-do list girl, so I like that ticking things off, you know. And I you know, my life always seems a bit random to a lot of people, but I do like a routine, believe it or not, you know. And I have a collie dog who's the same. She'll tell me exactly what time of day it's time to go for a walk now. We go 2 walks a day. And I've just mentioned the W word, and I can hear her pottering around next to me. She's like, "Oh, are we going now? It's a bit early." But that to-do list is a great thing, and having some kind of structure. Again, I suppose for me, it's that goal thing, really, isn't it? You know, thinking about it. And I like to be able to it's a great feeling. It must be a little hit of serotonin or something when you tick that to-do list off.
Oh,
and
yes.
even if I've done it but forgotten to write it down, sometimes I'll write it down just so I can take it off, which is really silly. But also my routines, I always make sure I find time for things like, as I mentioned earlier, walking in the woods. I know that makes me happy. I know that gives me a sense of well-being. And so I always make sure, like I said, the collie won't let me forget anyway, but I always make sure that's quality time and I'm not just rushing to do it. I take my time to go and be in a calming sort of environment. So, but routine is really key for me, funnily enough.
Yeah, I love that. I'm a massive to-do list fan as well. I can't show you the rest of this room because there are just lists everywhere. You'll probably think I'm quite crazy and probably be in a home. But love that. Thank you, Steph, for that. I guess as we start to kind of veer to the end of this podcast, I'd really like to kind of find out what would be your tips right now. We've talked about lots of things right now, such as imposter syndrome, the habits, obviously, through what's going to be happening in the UK over the next couple of days. But what would be your tips to the listeners of this podcast, to the people in the audience right now, if they're going to be going through a challenge over the next couple of months, or even wanting to achieve peak performance? What would be your tips right now? Let's go with Chris. Yeah, let's go Chris first. Yeah.
So I think just in terms of timing for this particular field trip, I think it's perfect because peak performance, well, if I speak personally, I think I'm still striving for peak performance. I'm not sure if we would get there. So I think tip wise, it would be kind of know what you're great at, know what you're good at, know what you need to get better at, or what you need to get a bit of support with as well. And then once you know that, kind of on top of all the kind of resilience tips I mentioned earlier, it's about kind of just start to kind of push that comfort zone a bit, and not just so that it can impact your performance, but when we start to do that, it starts to build our confidence. It starts to empower us a little bit, which is particularly relevant at the minute when everything else feels so out of control. To just keep going and continuously evolve and develop towards whatever peak performance is for you.
Love that, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, Chris is the expert here. All I can say is what really works for me, and that is what I've already said, really, which is working towards goals, even if they're tiny little goals. You know, they're just bite-sized chunks, just to give yourself that little bit of positive reinforcement. Setting a date for things, you know, a dream is just a dream until you set a date for it and something to work towards. And suddenly you're at the date and you go, oh, I've got to do it now, you know. So I think that's quite an important thing, some kind of structure to those goals. And yeah, just take it one bite at a time. And when all else fails, like I said, brute force and ignorance.
I like that. Yeah, I like that, brute force and ignorance. Very nice. Thank you, Steph. So we've got one last question actually for Steph and Chris. So over to you, Sarah.
Oh, thank you. So my question for Steph was, we've obviously focused in on the journey, but I'm wondering whether it was also quite tough to come back to normal life and what that was like.
Yeah, coming back was probably leaving was probably the hardest, and coming back was probably the second hardest. And that was, again, I keep talking about goals, but I'd lost my goal. I'd had that there for a long time, and suddenly it wasn't there anymore. Also the change of and the unwillingness to settle the fact that I felt like I'd escaped. I had this big sort of liberation by keeping on moving, and the world wasn't really, I was in it and I was part of it, but you know, the rules that everybody else lived by didn't seem to be, they weren't my structure anymore. I felt like I'd kind of escaped all that, if that makes sense. I was just passing through whatever I was doing. Coming home suddenly meant, oh, I might get trapped again. Also, there was no map to follow anymore. Where was I? I was always heading to utopia, and suddenly I was, well, where was I? What was I doing now? So it was actually quite a difficult thing. And the big slump after the high of coming home, there was a big drop off. And I think, again, I had to just remind myself that there are highs and lows. And usually after a peak, there's often a low. And you've just got to ride through it and keep going and find things to keep yourself busy while you're getting over that, and accepting that it's a normal thing, and that you're not completely crazy.
That's a great answer, Steph. I think we'll wrap up here with just a final thought here from Bev. She's popped it in the chat box. I think it's really important to define what peak performance is for each of us personally and specifically. So we have a measure, a standard that works for us. Not being consciously aware of intentional about it means we drift or we get disappointed with ourselves. Yeah, love that, Bev. I think that's really, really important. We've all got a different measure of peak performance. And again, to quote the earlier session with Jon about false summits, I think it is really important to understand what that is, whether it is having a goal, a to-do list like Steph has, and it's identifying what those habits are that will help you then define eventually what that peak performance is. So Steph, Chris, thank you so much for attending the podcast live. Thank you to both Jon and Sarah from Field Trip Online for this wonderful opportunity. And to all the people that are joined live, the listeners who'll be listening back to this won't be able to see this visually, but for all the people watching, thank you so much for coming onto the show. Hope you had a good time. This episode will be out in a couple of weeks' time, and I thank you so much. And don't forget to stay tuned, because Chris is about to do his session at 2 o'clock. If you can stay around for that, it'll be fantastic. But thank you very much, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.